Now, back home here, there's been no word on when COMAIR flights will resume. The airline has been grounded by the Civil Aviation Authority, leaving passengers stranded and frustrated. Some passengers are being forced now to rebook, but this is not an option for some who are complaining about inflated prices. Let's speak now with the National Consumer Commissioner. That's Joseph Selolo joining us now here on eNCA. Mr. Selolo, good afternoon. I mean, in such a situation, many people will say it is not fair for an airline or those other airlines that are still flying to inflate their prices.
Good evening to you and good evening to the viewers. Yes, I suppose one could say so, that it is probably unfair, but at this stage I do not think we do know why there would be a price increase.
Yeah, but then consumers, I mean, what would you do? I mean, you booked on one of these affected flights, you arrive there, they say no, we're no longer flying, then you need to go somewhere else and somebody else is charging more, but also you also might have to get extra accommodation. I mean, as a consumer, what options would a consumer have? What are your thoughts?
Yes, the airliner would then have to refund the consumers the amounts that they had paid to that affected airliner. But remember, the consumer booked flights because they needed to get to a destination. Then the airliner will then have to top up that fee. And if the airliner, the consumer is unable to get a flight, the airliner will be responsible to also book that accommodation for the affected consumer. Remember that this is no fault of the consumer. Therefore, the consumer should not suffer. It must be the airliner who takes responsibility.
Refunds, I mean, some of the people who were talking to our reporters were saying they're trying to get their monies back, but they are not winning. Is a consumer, consumer who's a client of the airline due a refund? Are they entitled to one?
By law, they are entitled to that refund because the law says if you accept a booking for a specified date and time, you must deliver that. When you fail, you must refund with interest on that amount. So it is no fault of the consumer, therefore the airliner must effect a full refund.
Yeah, and I mean, if nothing happens, if they're not getting any joy, I mean, could they lay complaints with the National Consumer Commission? Would you investigate?
Most definitely. If there are no refunds, consumers must then lodge complaints with us so that we can then investigate. And if we then find that indeed the airliner failed to comply with the law, we will then have to prosecute the airliner for failing to comply. In addition to us seeking them to refund the consumers, we will also then seeking to punish them by way of administrative penalty.
And what could such a penalty look like? What does it look like?
Look, in law, the penalty is 10% of an entity's annual income for the previous financial year, or 10%. So it's 10% or 1 million, whichever is the greater. So if the annual turnover, the 10% thereof is greater than the million, that would be the fine.
Okay. Now, as we speak to you now, today, when we reached out to you just to get a sense of what's happening, have you received any complaints? Is there something that you would want to investigate? And I'm asking this very briefly, Mr. Selolo, against a background of saying we've been 2 years in the pandemic, and we know how the travel and tourism industry has been affected, and airlines, as you know, some of them don't exist anymore, don't fly anymore. So it's been tough times for everybody. Is there something that will be concerning, that here we have 2 airlines that are not flying, COMAIR has been affected in terms of Kulula, and then they're not up in the air, and people are now forking out a lot of money to be able to get to their destinations, and some of them are even being refused, according to what we're hearing, the refunds. Would you investigate this?
Look, in terms of the law, anywhere where a consumer or a supplier does not comply with the law, we then have to investigate. In this case, one cannot say that there was what we call vis major or an event that is beyond the control of the airliner and the consumer. This is within the control of the airliner. The consumer did nothing in this case. So the airliner will then have to be investigated. Definitely, this is a case we would investigate. As we speak, we had not as yet received complaints, but consumers are advised to lodge their complaints with us.
Thank you very much. Joseph Selolo, the National Consumer Commission there.